It's a spoof, though, surely, on the life of Christ, isn't it? I mean, aren't you going to get into a lot of trouble about that?
I think we'll get into a lot of trouble. I think there'll be a lot of sort of hackles raised, but it isn't a spoof on the life of Christ, in fact. It started off as, let's do a life of Christ, and we thought, well, that's a very outrageous thing to do. And we actually started thinking about that. But then we all went away and did our research, and we started reading the Gospels again. And I think all unanimously came to the conclusion, well, you know, Christ wasn't a bad bloke, really. There's not a lot you can make fun of. I mean, I would quarrel with him on a few occasions. I think he didn't do right by some of the fig trees in the world. I think he did blast them a bit, and I think that was a bit wrong of him. And some of the swine, I think he shouldn't have treated swine like he did. But generally, he was a good bloke, and so, you know, we felt, well, we don't have any quarrel with Christ. We're rather on his side. So in fact, we did the life of somebody who was born in the stable next to Christ, and who wasn't Christ, and didn't have quite such a sort of glamorous life.
It must have been terribly difficult, though, to make a film like this. I mean, as I say, you're asking for trouble, really.
Well, it wasn't difficult to make the film. Well, it was, actually, yes. EMI made it very difficult. EMI just made it as difficult as they could. They sort of said they were going to put up the money for the film, and we started into production, and then they suddenly said, "Ooh, sorry, we've just read the script. I'm sorry, we gave you the money, but we hadn't read the script. Oh, now we've read the script, we think we can't really give you the money at all." So that made it difficult. But then George Harrison and Dennis O'Brien came up with the money, and we were able to make it.
The Life of Brian, though, opens in Britain fairly soon, and I suppose we can expect the same sort of shock horror reaction here too. One interesting point, though, the film's distributors, CIC, always use EMI cinemas. Now, The Life of Brian is making a lot of money in the States. All the critics over there think it's one of the funniest films they've ever seen. If the same thing happens here, some of those profits will go to EMI's boss, Lord Delfont, who, as we've just heard, withdrew his money from the project on grounds of blasphemy.
The film reminded me of something which I obviously knew, but one tends to forget, that it wasn't only Jesus that was crucified. I mean, an awful lot of people were crucified in the most horrific circumstances every day of the week under Roman rule.
Yes, that's very true.
And that fact came home in the film. You realise that Jesus didn't have a sort of total copyright to crucifixion.
No, but Jesus was crucified, wasn't he, for his obedience to the will of God.
He was crucified surely for blasphemy.
They accused him of blasphemy because he was obedient to the will of God and of his kingdom. You can't say that came over today, that any of the people were being crucified.
No, but that wasn't true.
I mean, the whole way that it was done, they were not dying for a noble idea.
Well, neither were the...
Yeah, but I mean, I think that what... Can I just make the point I was trying to make earlier on about the film not being seen entirely in religious terms? That, I mean, as Tim has said, people were crucified then as common criminals. It was just a form of capital punishment employed by the Romans, who were regarded as a highly civilized people. But it was capital punishment. And in the film, we examine attitudes to capital punishment. As far as I know, in this country, the majority of people, we are constantly told, are in favour of capital punishment. It just seems that we haven't come that far in all that time.
Why do you think that through all these centuries of Christendom that the greatest minds, the most creative minds, the greatest artists were believers in this thing that you airily dismiss and say that you, making this little film, have managed to see deeply into it and to reach conclusions?
I can't say they do. What about Freddie Eyre? What about Bertrand Russell? You dismiss them, of course. They don't count.
I said in the centuries of Christendom. I didn't say in our time. I said that if you were to make a list of all the people who have contributed most
of them would have been Muslims if they'd been living in the Arab countries, or Buddhists if they'd been living in...
What has that got to do with it? These people were inspired. These people were inspired by this event, which you have celebrated in this film by a lot of people on crosses singing a sort of, as though it's sort of rather inferior musical.
Death perhaps doesn't matter that much, which after all you're saying the whole time. You're looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it keenly, but I'm looking forward to it.
About it?
No, I'm looking forward to it keenly because I relate it to these very things that you dismiss. I relate it to the story of the Incarnation, this great drama of the Incarnation, which you have reduced to a sort of comic film. Now, you think that in doing that, you have shed light. But I have to tell you that you haven't shed light. You've made some rather bad jokes, and the only reason that people come to see it is because they still relate it to this extraordinary story of the Incarnation, which is in fact the beginning and the end of everything that our civilization stands for. Our civilization began with a man, the Apostle Paul, telling pagan world about the Incarnation. That was the beginning of it.
We're not the only civilization in the world.
Not at all. No, I'm not saying
there's a lot of civilizations with different religions,
Certainly.
right?
I'm not.
And the important thing is that people should be open to the various possibilities, and that they should take a critical attitude.
Yes, but
to them.
whoever said they shouldn't be open? But you don't make people open by producing the sort of buffoonery that you produce.
You certainly don't make people open by giving them the kind of garbage I was given at that school.
Well, then I'm very sympathetic to you for having received this garbage, some of it at the hands of our friend Bishop here. I'm very sympathetic indeed, and I think it's very sad and tragic that you should have been cut off from something that's so wonderful and only given garbage. But I would simply point out to you that if you care about what constitutes what we call Western civilization, which now probably is coming to an end, and you were to consider the role that's been played in that by this thing that you treat as a piece of buffoonery, you would have a certain humility in saying that you have been able, through making it, to shed light.
But you keep making the basic assumption. Sorry, let me just say this, Mike. You keep making the basic assumption that we are ridiculing Christ and Christ's teaching, and I say that we are not.
But do you imagine that your scene, for instance, of the Sermon on the Mount, the scene in your film of the Sermon on the Mount, is not ridiculing one of the most sublime utterances that any human being has ever spoken on this earth? Of course it is.
No, it's making fun of the guy who's remembered it wrong and of the people who don't understand it and miss the point.
Well, I think
that's really unfair, because I think that a lot of people looking in will think that we have actually ridiculed Christ physically. Christ is played by an actor, Ken Colley. He speaks the words from the Sermon on the Mount. He's treated absolutely respectfully. The camera then pans away. We go right to the back of the crowd to someone who shouts, "Speak up," because they cannot hear him. Now, I mean, if that utterly undermines one's faith in Christ, then I think the faith cannot be terribly strong.
I started off by saying that this is such a 10th-rate film that I don't believe that it would disturb anybody's faith.
I know you started with an open mind. I realise that.
I certainly...